I continue to be endlessly fascinated with Rachel Dolezal, the former NAACP chapter president, who was pretending to be black, and I don't even know if pretending at this point is the word we're agreeing on. I'll talk to you about that word former NAACP chapter president as opposed to current in a few minutes, but I was riveted this morning, Louis. She did an interview with Matt Lauer from the Today Show, and there were all sorts of just bizarre questions, and rather, I had the questions as a result of the bizarre answers that she gave, and it's becoming increasingly apparent that there's probably something pretty significant going on emotionally with Rachel Dolezal. We'll go through some of this interview. I have a few clips that I pulled out here. First is just the basic question from Matt Lauer to Rachel Dolezal, which is, are you African American? Let's get that on the record within the context of this interview. First, let's take a look at that clip to begin with.
Are you an African American woman?
I identify as black.
You identify as black. Let me put a picture up of you in your early 20s, though. And when you see this picture, is this an African American woman? Or is that a Caucasian woman?
I'm not in my early 20s, but...
That's a little younger, I guess?
Yeah. I got 16 in that picture.
Is she a Caucasian woman or an African American woman?
I would say that visibly she would be identified as white by people who see her.
So again, Louis, this same sort of wordplay, which is I identify as black as opposed to are you black, and really sort of dancing around this idea of race as a social construct, etc. And you know, what's interesting to me is a lot of the discussion around Rachel Dolezal and the reaction to her identifying as black has been from people sometimes hoping to point out some kind of double standard, saying, wait a second, David, you can't both believe that race is a social construct and that Rachel Dolezal can't simply identify as black if it's merely a social construct. And what's that, Louis?
I mean, it's not that simple, right?
It's not that simple, exactly, because the idea of race as a social construct, of course, is based in part on the idea that we're all humans, right? And our origins all appear to go back to Africa. And the modern interpretation of race has been socially constructed. That does not mean that there are not differences between humans today that would fall under the sort of umbrella of what we call racial differences. And we also can't say, even if you're a full race is a social construct believer, that doesn't mean that there aren't implications to that social construct of race. So you're not really, the idea that that people are now being caught in a sort of a double standard hypocrisy around this is completely fabricated. That's really the false notion here, that there's an incredible double standard that you say, well, our origins are all in Africa, yet Rachel Dolezal was still lying. That is not a contradiction.
No, and I think it just doesn't make sense to focus on that. That's not really what the issue is here, and that's not helping us try to figure out what's going on with this woman.
So in the interest of trying to figure out what's going on with Rachel Dolezal, let's go to another question from Matt Lauer, which is, when did you first start identifying as black?
And this goes back to a very early age with my self-identification with the black experience as a very young child.
When did it start?
I would say about 5 years old.
You began identifying yourself as African American?
I was drawing self-portraits with the brown crayon instead of the peach crayon, and the black, black curly hair, and that was how I was portraying myself.
So it's
at 5 years old, Louis. At 5 years old, she says that she started to some degree identify as black. And then I want to talk about that as well. Let me play the last clip for you here, which is where she explains that she's a black hairstylist. So that may be why some people identified her as black. It's kind of a weird thing. Like if sometimes I go to a barbershop where all the staff is black, but that doesn't mean that I think that everybody whose hair they cut is black, and I wouldn't misinterpret. I mean, just none of it makes sense, right? But here's her explanation there and her answer to whether she has changed her skin color.
Not just at that time, but before then too, I have had to answer those who have seen me, and because I'm a black hairstylist, have styled my hair in many different ways. have been identified as mixed, light-skinned, black, etc. And, I've had to answer a lot of questions throughout my life.
You've changed your appearance. Your complexion appears darker than it did in the photos of you as a young lady. Have you done something to darken your complexion?
I certainly don't stay out of the sun, and I also don't, as some of the critics have said, put on blackface as a performance.
Yeah, let me address that, because some people have said that the way you've changed your opinion is akin to putting on blackface. And Jonathan Capehart wrote in the Washington Post, blackface remains highly racist no matter how down with the cause a white person is.
So again, not really a clear answer, saying that she certainly doesn't stay out of the sun. And the entire interview was like this, Lewis. And what I came away from the interview thinking was just, this is someone who has some pretty serious emotional distress going on here.
That could be. I'm not really sure. It's pretty shocking to see that picture of her as a kid, and you see this clearly just a very white-looking young woman, and then to see how she has transformed herself, it's shocking.
All right, so send me your thoughts about the interview with Matt Lauer. We'll discuss that more tomorrow, but now let's get on to some of the news that has broken regarding Rachel Dolezal.